It's me again, Ira. So for today's video, we're going to define what is mass and distributed practice. So before we undergo to the topic, may I ask you first, how do you study? Do you review your notes every day? Or do you cram all at once right before a test? This is a question every student has to face, and how you answer it can actually have some pretty big impacts on your academic career. While the concept of studying sounds commonplace, many psychologists have actually dedicated their careers to exploring the ways that we learn and retain information. Yeah, they spend their lives studying the process of studying. Now, how do you study for that? In this lesson, we'll look at two approaches to studying, which are mass practice and distributed practice, as well as how they work and can benefit or hurt you as a learner. Researchers tell us that there are two main ways that students study. The first is called mass practice. What is mass practice? Mass practice, which describes studying that is done less frequently but for large periods of time. Essentially, this is the scholarly term for cramming. While mass practice may feel efficient and is capable of helping a student pass an exam, it is not a great long-term solution. Information memorized this way is very likely to be forgotten once the exam is over. So if you're planning to ever use this information again in your career, for example, then mass practice is not good as your study plan. Next is, what is distributed practice? So distributed practice is the opposite of mass practice. It is the learning system called distributed practice, while mass practice involves studying the material in mass. Distributed practice describes a more spaced out method where you study in intervals over time. Instead of studying all of the material for hours the night before exam, try studying the material for 1 hour a day. Students who rely on distributed practice are much more likely to retain the information beyond the date of the exam, which can help with future classes and with their careers. Overall, distributed practice correlates to a much higher academic success rate. So what do you think is better, the mass practice or the distributed practice? For me, distributed practice is better because it will help you as a student to be more persuasive rather than the other one. Okay, let's discuss about the benefit of more and shorter session. So what do you think are the benefits for this? Do you have any idea for this? Okay, so research on the question of the length and distribution of practice session shows support for the benefit of distributed practice. This means that when experiments have compared a few long practice sessions with more frequent and shorter sessions, the results show that practicing skills during shorter session leads to better learning. A classic example of research supporting this general conclusion is a study published many years ago by Badley and Longman in year 1978. They were attempting to determine the best way to schedule training session for postal workers on mailing sorting machine, which required operating a typewriter-like keyboard. So, as typically used, a mass practice schedule involves a longer active practice or work time and shorter rest periods than a distributed schedule. Although rather vague, these definitions are necessary because of the type of situation to which they apply. So in this discussion, we will consider mass and distributed practice in terms of schedule for both between and within practice session. So when applied to the length and distribution of practice session, a mass schedule will have fewer practice session than distributed schedule. So when each mass practice session requiring more and or longer practice, a distributed schedule, on the other hand, will distribute the same amount of practice time across more sessions, so that each session is shorter than each sessions in the mass schedule. So the distributed practice session must be extended over a longer period to achieve the same total amount of practice. When these terms apply the scheduling term, when this term applies to the scheduling of practice within sessions, the focus is on the relative amount of time for active practice for a trial and the rest between trials. So this means that the mass schedule will have either no rest for a very short rest interval between trials. So a distributed schedule will have much longer rest intervals than a mass schedule.